we were just looking at Disney hitting an all-time high. You went and met Walt Disney. He didn't know who the heck you were. You called and asked for a meeting.
That was 49 years ago. Actually, I went out there, and I wasn't scheduled to meet with Walt. I was scheduled to meet with the treasurer.
Why, to buy stock?
Well, we owned the whole Walt Disney Company at that time was selling for $80 million with no debt. The Pirates ride was just about to be introduced at Disneyland. That was going to cost $17 million. So here was the stock selling at less than 5 times rides now. And Walt came in and he said, "Would you like to have lunch with me?" And he couldn't have been nicer. It was a great experience.
The management today, would he be proud of Bob Iger?
Bob Iger is a home run hitter. I mean, he is really, really good, and he's a great guy on top of that. No,
well, why don't you own the stock now?
Well, I made a terrible mistake. we owned a chunk of Cap Cities ABC and it merged with Disney, and we kept the Disney stock for a while, and then we sold it. That was before Iger took over, but we probably shouldn't have sold Cap Cities ABC because ESPN we owned 80% of ESPN, and that of course has been the home run asset of all time.
Oh, dummy.
Yeah,
what
exactly.
Were you thinking?
Well, you're being kind.
The mistakes you don't see in our case are way bigger than the mistakes that you see. We owned 5% of the Walt Disney Company in 1966. The whole Walt Disney Company was selling for $80 million in 1966, debt-free. $4 million bought us 5% of the company. They spent $17 million on the Pirates ride in 1966 building. Here was a company selling at less than 5 times rides. You know, and they had a lot of rides. I mean, that is cheap. I remember the knock on it in Wall Street that was that they were earning a lot of money that year, and it was Mary Poppins, and that there wasn't anything coming next year. And I remember I went to see Mary Poppins at a theater on Broadway, about 45th, at about 2 in the afternoon. I've got a little attaché case and everything. I'm going to see Mary Poppins. I got up to this woman at the ticket booth, and I said, "I've got a kid around here someplace, you know, I'm taking it." I was going to see if I thought this thing could be run over and over again in the future. But here they were. They had 200 and some films of one sort or another in the can at that point. They had 300 acres down in Anaheim with Disneyland drawing at that time 9 million people a year, and the whole place was selling for $80 million. So we bought 5% for $4 million. And the great news is we sold 5% for $6 million about a year later. That 5% now would be worth about $1 billion. But you don't see that. That conventional accounting doesn't pick that up. That's the kind of mistake I made.
I was just wondering if the surprise could be coming from Disney, because it seems to me they've been coasting up until very recently on the efforts of a person that's no longer with the company, Katzenberg, who is one of those rare geniuses like Spielberg that has his finger on the pulse of the American people, and that they don't come along every day, even in Hollywood. Yeah. That it might be a very different company now that all of his efforts are, so to speak, out of the pipeline.
Yeah. Have you finished, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Katzenberg is a real talent. I would say that by far the most important person at Disney in the last 12 years or whatever it's been has been Michael Eisner. I mean, if you know him and what he has done in the business, there's no one. Frank Wells did a terrific job in conjunction with Eisner, but Eisner has been the Walt Disney, in effect, of his tenure. He knows the business. He loves the business. You know, he eats and lives and breathes it. And he has been, in my view, by far the most important factor in Disney's success. Now they face competition. The money is in, the big money is in the animated films and everything that revolves around that, because you go from films to parks to character merchandising and back, and I mean it's a circular sort of thing which feeds on itself. There's going to be plenty of competition in that. I mean they've you've seen what MCA and Universal's going to do the parks in Florida, and you know what DreamWorks is going to do in animation, and now you've got new technology in animation, you know, through Steve Jobs, and there's a lot of things going on in that field. So the question is, 10 years from now, what place in the mind, because it's a share of mind, it's not, you know, they call it share of market, but it starts with share of mind, and what place in the mind of billions of children around the world and their parents does Disney itself have, and their characters, relative to that owned by other organizations and other characters? And it's a competitive world, so there will be people fighting for that. But I would rather start with Disney's hand than anyone else's by some margin, and I would rather start with Michael Eisner running the place than with anyone else by some margin. So that does not mean that it can't become a much more competitive business, because people look at the video releases of a Lion King and they salivate. You know, you sell 30 million copies of something at whatever it may be, $16 or $17, and you can figure out the manufacturing costs, and you know, it gets your attention, and it gets your competitors' attention. But going back, if I thought the children of the world were going to want to be entertained 10 or 20 years from now, and I had my choice of betting on who is going to have a special place, if anyone has a special place in the minds of those kids and their parents, I think I would probably rather bet on Disney, and I would feel particularly good about betting on him if I had the guy who has done what Eisner has done over those years presiding in the future. Charlie?
Well, I think it helps to do the simple arithmetic. Suppose you have 1 billion children of low middle income 20 years from now, and suppose you could make $10 per year per child after taxes from your position. It gets into very large numbers, and I don't know about your children and grandchildren, but mine want to see Disney. And they want to see it over and over and over again. They don't want to see Katzenberg.
Well,
I mean, in terms of the trade name.
It's a pretty good trade name. I mean, when you think about names around the world, it's interesting that you know, there's very hard to beat the name Coca-Cola, but Disney's got it's a very, very big name. And Charlie's point that they want to see him over and over again, and it's kind of nice to be able to recycle Snow White every 7 or 8 years. You hit a different crowd, and it's kind of like having an oil field, you know, where you pump out all the oil and sell it, and then it all seeps back in over 7 or 8 years.
With respect to Eisner and Disney, how would you define Michael Eisner's circle of competence, and are you concerned that he might step outside it?
Well, I would say that he has proven himself very good at understanding what Disney is really all about. And you can look back to the predecessor management between Walt and Eisner, and they didn't really do much with that if you look at those years. You know, what is special about Disney, and how do you make it more special? And how do you make it more special to more people? I mean, those are the things that you want to manage, and you've got wonderful ingredients to work with when you're working with something like Disney. I mean, you know, one of the advantages we were talking about the Mayo Clinic and brain surgeons, and the nice thing about the mouse is that he doesn't have an agent. You know, I mean, the mouse is yours, and he's not in there renegotiating, and you know, every week or every month, and saying, you know, just look at how much more famous I've become in China, you know, or something. So if you own the mouse, you own the mouse. And Eisner understands all of that very well. I would say he's been very skillful in terms of how he's thought about it. I worry about any manager. It has nothing to do with Michael Eisner, but Charlie and I worry about ourselves in terms of getting out of our circle of competence, and we've done it. It is very tempting, and it's probably part of the human condition in terms of hubris or something, that if you've, as Charlie would say, if you're a duck floating on a pond and it's been raining and you're going up in the world, after a while you think it's you and not the rain, that you're some duck. But
right.
and we all succumb to that a little bit. But I think that I think Disney, Coca-Cola, Gillette, I think those companies are very focused. I think our operating units are very focused, and I think that gives us a huge advantage over the managers that are getting a little bored and decide that they better fool around with this or that to show just how talented they really are. Charlie?
Yeah. Eisner is quite creative, and he also distrusts projections. And that is a very good combination to have in the motion picture business.
Yeah, Charlie was a lawyer for, 20th century in the old days? Yeah, and he saw a little bit of how Hollywood operated, and it kept us out of buying any motion picture stocks for about 30 years. Every time I go near one, he'd regale me with a few stories of the past. So it's a business where people can trade other people's money for their own significance in their world, and that is a dangerous combination where if I can buy significance in my world with your money, there's no telling what I'll do.
Part of the business reminds me of an oil company in California, and it was controlled by one individual, and people used to say about it, if they ever do find any oil, that old man will steal it. And the motion picture business, it's only about half of it that has normal commercial morals.
We're not applying that to Disney.
No.
Disney is really Disney's done an extraordinary job for the shareholders, and they make real money out of movies. Most movie companies they've made money for everybody associated with it, but not a lot is stuck to the shareholders.
You owned Disney once before and sold it. You also owned advertising companies in the 70s, I believe.
Right.
And you sold them. Could we have some insight into your thinking as to why you sold them?
I'm not sure I want to give you any insight into that thinking. Well, we'll start off with the fact that when I was 11, I bought some city service preferred at 38, and it went to 200, but I sold at 40. So, grabbing my $2 a share of profit. So everything we've ever sold has gone up subsequently, but some of them have gone up more painfully subsequently than others. And certainly the Disney sale in the 60s was a huge mistake. I should have been buying. I did forget about holding. And that's happened many times. I mean, we think that anything we sell should go up subsequently because we own good businesses. And we may sell them because we need money for something else, but we still think they're good businesses, and we think good businesses are going to be worth more over time. So everything I sold in the past, virtually, that I can think of, has gone on to sell it at a lot more money, for a lot more money, and I would expect that would continue to be the case. That's not a source of distress, but I must say that selling to Disney was a mistake, and actually the ad agencies have done very well. Since we sold them too. Now maybe some of that money went into Coca-Cola or something else. So I don't worry about that. I would worry, frankly, if I sold a bunch of things right at the top, because that would indicate that in effect I was practicing the bigger fool type approach to investing, and I don't think that can be practiced successfully over time. I think the most successful investors, if they sell at all, will be selling things that end up going a lot higher because it means that they've been buying into good businesses as they've gone along. Charlie?
Well, I'm glad that the questioner brought this touch of humility because it is really useful to be reminded of your errors. I mean, and I think we're pretty good at that. I mean, we kind of mentally rub our own noses in our own mistakes. And that is a very good mental habit. Warren can tell you the exact number of cents per share that he sold at and compare it with the current price. It actually hurts him.
It actually doesn't hurt. The truth is, because you just keep on doing things. But it is instructive to do postmortems on everything, and as long as you don't get carried away with it. But every acquisition decision, that kind of thing, there should be postmortems done. Most companies don't like to do postmortems on their capital expenditures. I've been a director of a lot of companies over the years, and they've usually not spent a lot of time on the postmortems. They spend a lot of time on telling you how wonderful the acquisitions are going to be or the capital expenditures, but they don't like to look so hard necessarily at the results.
Think of how refreshing the board of directors meeting would be if they sat down, and now we'll spend 3 hours examining all our stupid blunders and how much we've blown.
And then after that, the compensation committee will meet. No, that is not going to happen.
This is a question that came in, I guess, in regards to some of the controversy that was kicked up. What was it specifically that prompted the idea for windowless dorm rooms? Please walk us through this decision. I guess this is in regards to your design for student housing with no windows.
There. Nobody in his right mind would prefer a blank wall in a bedroom to a wall with a window in it. The reason you take the windows out is you're getting something else from the design considered as a whole. If you stop to think about it, a big cruise ship has a huge shortage of windows in bedrooms because too many of the staterooms are either below the waterline or they're on the wrong side of the aisle. And so in the very nature of things, you get a shortage. You can't change the shape of the ship. You have to do without a lot of the windows to have a ship that's functional. That's required by the laws of hydrodynamics. And so we get the advantage of a big ship, but it means a lot of the staterooms can't have windows. Similarly, if you want a bunch of people who are educating each other to be conveniently close to one another, you get a shortage of windows, and in exchange you get a whole lot of people who are getting a lot of advantage from being near one another, and they have to do without a real window in the bedroom. It doesn't matter, the air can be as pure as you want it, and the light that comes in through an artificial window can mimic the spectrum of daylight perfectly. And it's an easy trade-off. You pay $20,000 a week or something in a big cruise ship to have a stateroom with an artificial window. And for a long time on a Disney cruise ship, they had two different kinds of windows of staterooms, one with a window and one without a window. And they charged more with the one, they got a higher price in rent for the one with an artificial window than they got for a real one. In other words, they'd reduce the disadvantage to zero. In fact, they made it an advantage. And so it's a game of trade-offs. That poor, pathetic architect who criticized me is just an ignoramus. He can't help himself. I guarantee the one thing about him, he's not fixable. Of course you have to make trade-offs in architecture.
Charlie, another question came in about Costco.